Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. It started with laughter on the lake, strangers on his dock, acting like they owned the place. By summer's end, it would spiral into a full-blown war. Forged maps, flaming trash bins, secret recordings, and one man's fight to defend what was his. Welcome to the battle for Little Pine Lake. It was early July when I first realized solitude has an expiration date. I'd moved into my uncle's old lake house just 6 months earlier after inheriting the property. A sturdy cedar-framed structure nestled beside Little Pine Lake in North Carolina, with a wraparound porch, thick pine trees shielding it from the road, and a private dock that stretched into the water like a handshake from nature itself. My uncle, a former district attorney, had spent decades reinforcing every inch of this place. The property lines were legally bulletproof. Everything was recorded, notarized, archived. That man was more meticulous with land records than most are with their own marriages. I just finished a full restoration of the dock. New planks, reinforced supports, tasteful aluminum railing, a small solar canopy for shade, even a discreet motion light system. It had taken me weeks and more cash than I like to admit, but when I stepped out onto it in the mornings with my coffee, it felt like I owned a small corner of peace the world couldn't touch. There was a kind of sacred silence in those early hours, broken only by the distant croak of bullfrogs and the occasional splash of bass, until the Saturday that ruined it. That morning, I woke up to sound. Loud sound. Laughing, shouting, and the unmistakable shriek of a Bluetooth speaker cranked past what any reasonable person would consider acceptable near water. I rolled out of bed and glanced through the upstairs window. That's when I saw them, no fewer than 10 people gathered on my dock like it was public property. Folding chairs, towels flung over my railings, kids doing cannonballs off the edge. And at the center of it all, a woman in a wide straw hat, standing like she was orchestrating a festival. I threw on jeans and a plain t-shirt and walked down slowly. I wasn't angry yet, confused maybe, and tired. My first thought was that they must have been lost, or mistaken the property for some public access point. I'd seen hikers before who wandered too close, usually quick to apologize and shuffle off. But the moment I set foot on the dock, the woman turned toward me with the air of someone who's had power too long and likes the sound of her own voice. "Oh," she said, hands on her hips, "you must be the new guy." "I live here," I replied calmly. "This is private property. You're all trespassing." She gave me a slow once-over like I was a nuisance who'd interrupted her brunch. "This dock," she said, "has been open to the community for years. I've been tanning here every summer for over a decade." "That may be," I said, "but this property line hasn't changed. It's privately owned. Always has been. The dock is legally registered as part of this parcel. You're going to have to leave." That's when her tone shifted from entitled to confrontational. "You don't have the right to block access to a public lake. This is shared water, and that means shared shoreline. Everyone here knows that. I'm Karen Murphy, president of the Cedar Hollow Homeowners Association, and I can assure you, you're mistaken. I'm not part of your HOA, I told her. Never was. My land sits outside your community. You can check the tax maps or the county GIS system." "Don't you dare lecture me on property lines," she snapped. "You think just because you threw some planks over the water, you get to dictate who comes and goes? I'm calling the county. You'll be lucky if they don't force you to rip the whole damn thing out." The people around her began murmuring, some of them already collecting their towels. One guy gave me an apologetic shrug and herded his kids toward shore. But Karen wasn't going anywhere. She planted herself like a general defending a beachhead. "I'm telling you for the last time," I said, now calmly pulling out my phone and starting a video recording. "This is private property. If you don't leave, I'll call the sheriff and report a trespass." "Oh, please do," she laughed. "I'd love to see you try." She stood there another 2 minutes just to prove a point. But when she finally left, grumbling, muttering legal threats, I could already feel the shift. This wasn't just a rude neighbor. This was someone who thought rules were for other people. The kind who smiled while tearing up your rights with manicured hands and called it community spirit. That night, I installed a heavy chain across the base of the dock with 2 signs: private property, no trespassing. I also uploaded the video of Karen's outburst to a secure drive. Call it insurance. Then I filed a formal incident report with the county sheriff's office and sent a certified letter to the Cedar Hollow HOA, notifying them that the dock and surrounding shoreline were private, non-HOA land, and any further uninvited entry would be considered unlawful trespass. I wasn't looking for a fight, but I also wasn't going to be steamrolled by some waterfront tyrant in a sun hat. The following Saturday, I woke to a buzzing on my phone, alerts from the motion cameras I'd installed after the Karen incident, as I'd started calling it. When I opened the app, the footage showed a group of people standing outside the chain I'd put up at the dock entrance. It was just past 9 a.m., and already they were congregating like it was a community picnic. I stepped outside and saw them through the trees. 5 adults, some kids, and Karen front and center. She wasn't yelling this time. No, she was pacing in front of the chain, gesturing at the dock, speaking with theatrical exasperation to a man with a clipboard. It didn't take long to figure out who he was. Local news had arrived. I walked down calmly, phone in hand, already recording. As I came into view, Karen turned with the fakest smile I've ever seen plastered on a human face. "There he is," she said, waving toward the reporter and cameraman like she'd summoned me by incantation. "This is the man denying our entire community access to our lake." "Our lake?" I repeated. "Ma'am, that's a private dock, on private land, which you're standing on again. Did you not get the certified letter?" The reporter, a clean-cut guy with a generic haircut and the voice of a game show host, stepped forward. "Sir, would you mind giving us your side?" "Ms. Murphy says this area has been open to public use for over a decade." "Sure," I said. "Here's my side. This land's been private since the Reagan administration. I have the deed, the survey, and aerial maps dating back to when rotary phones were still a thing. The dock was built legally and permitted. These folks, they're trespassing." Karen stepped in before he could follow up. "This man moved in 6 months ago and decided he owns the whole shoreline, just walled it off from the community. The kids used to swim here every summer. Now they can't. He put up chains like it's Alcatraz." She gestured dramatically, the way people do when they know a camera's rolling. I looked at the reporter, who had that gleam in his eye that said ratings. "If you want facts," I told him, "I'll be happy to send you copies of the land records, or you could visit the county GIS system. Either way, you'll find this dock is part of parcel number 4827-36-1918, not under any HOA authority." "We'll be sure to look into that," the reporter said with a smile that meant we won't. By Monday morning, the segment aired on local TV. I watched it with a tight jaw. The report opened with sweeping shots of the lake and children playing on a distant beach, none of which were on my property. Then it cut to Karen in her wide hat, looking noble as hell while delivering sound bites about protecting community heritage and standing up to exclusion. My name wasn't mentioned directly, but they used phrases like reclusive homeowner and recent newcomer. One neighbor even claimed that people had been allowed to use the dock for years without issue, though I couldn't recall seeing any of them at my uncle's funeral. The piece ended with a rhetorical question from the anchor. Who really owns the shoreline? And should one person be allowed to claim what's been shared for decades? Cute. That week, I started getting mail. Not the usual spam or bills. No, these were anonymous notes in barely legible handwriting. One said, "You can't steal nature." Another, "We know where you sleep." Real original stuff. One envelope had nothing inside but an old photo of the dock, probably ripped from someone's HOA newsletter with the words "traitor" scrawled across it in red ink. But the real gut punch came Thursday night. I'd just finished dinner and stepped out onto the back porch for some air when I smelled it. Burning plastic. I ran toward the dock and saw smoke curling up from a melted trash bin near the stairs. Someone had lit it on fire. It hadn't caught the planks thanks to a recent rain, but it was too damn close for comfort. I stomped it out with my boots and called the sheriff. When deputies arrived, they took my statement and reviewed the camera footage. It showed a figure in a hoodie walking up with a bag, dropping it in the bin, and lighting a match. Low res, but clear enough to make out the walk, like someone trying to look casual but not too casual. The tech at the sheriff's office cross-referenced it against a DMV photo and confirmed it 2 days later. Jason McCarty, brother-in-law to none other than Karen Murphy, lives 2 streets over in Cedar Hollow, used to work in construction. Has a history of petty vandalism, though nothing that ever stuck. I pressed charges, arson, trespass, property damage. The sheriff's deputy told me it'd likely start as a misdemeanor but might escalate. They'd need to see how far the investigation went. At this point, I wasn't even surprised. The letter campaign, the camera crew, and now arson light, it was escalating faster than a HOA fine notice in springtime. So I upgraded my setup, installed infrared trail cameras facing the trees, added motion-triggered spotlights, and reinforced the chain gate with a steel post and tamper alarm. I wasn't looking for a fight, but I was damn sure ready for one. The next morning, a new sign went up at the dock's entrance, just beneath the private property plaque. You light it. You bought it. Let them read between the lines. By the following week, I was officially the villain of Little Pine Lake. I walked into the gas station that Monday to grab a coffee and a bag of ice, and I felt it instantly. The shift. The man behind the counter didn't offer the usual nod. A woman near the Red Bull cooler gave me a half-second side-eye, then practically sprinted to the register like I was going to steal her damn fruit snacks. On the bulletin board by the door was a flyer neatly printed and tacked up next to dog walking services and local car wash coupons. Protect our community access. Stop the dock lockdown. It had a blurred photo of my property taken from across the lake, complete with a red circle around the dock and bold letters underneath. Has one man ruined summer for dozens of families? Karen's media campaign had clearly hit its stride. There was even a QR code at the bottom linking to a petition on some HOA-run website. I scanned it with my phone. As of that morning, it had over 800 signatures from HOA members across Cedar Hollow and surrounding communities. Some were real people. Some were obviously fake. Mickey Lakewater and Docky McDockface didn't inspire much fear, but that wasn't the point. The narrative was cementing. I was the bad guy. That night, I reviewed the footage from my trail cameras. Nothing out of the ordinary. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that things were shifting behind closed doors. I sent a copy of the video of the trash fire and Jason McCarty's silhouette to my attorney, Holly Mason. She called me back the next day, sounding more alert than usual. "They're doubling down," she said. "You're not dealing with just one angry woman anymore." I think the HOA is pulling strings to make this look like a civic dispute rather than what it is, a land grab wrapped in nostalgia. I didn't need convincing. That very day, I received a certified letter from the County Land Use Office, an official notice of administrative hearing stemming from a formal complaint filed by the Cedar Hollow Homeowners Association. It claimed I had unlawfully enclosed and obstructed access to a traditionally communal shoreline segment, and that construction of a private dock may have occurred without proper authorization under subdivision recreational access statutes. Read it twice, then laughed. Out loud. Alone. That was a new milestone for me. I called Holly. "They're coming after the dock now," I said. "Retroactively." "Of course they are," she replied. "They're trying to build the illusion of ambiguity. They're going to get buried in paperwork. You've seen the survey plans. And the permits," she added. "We've got them all. What they have, I guarantee, is a shaky stack of wishful thinking and probably something a little more flexible." That night, I dug through the file cabinets in the study and pulled out every document my uncle had left behind. His files were organized like a damn crime lab. I found the original lot survey from 1987, the deed transfer when he bought it from a forestry trust, the shoreline development license from 1991, the environmental impact study, and, my personal favorite, a hand-signed letter from the county engineer, acknowledging the dock's compliance under Article 4, Section 3 of the Recreational Use Act. I scanned them all and sent them to Holly. "Beautiful," she said. "It's almost annoying how thorough your uncle was. He always said paperwork beats politics." She laughed. He'd be proud. The next day, a new storm hit. Holly forwarded me a PDF, something she received from a clerk in the county office. It was a scanned map labeled 1994 Recreational Overlay Plan, Cedar Hollow Shoreline. The document showed the entire southeastern shoreline, my side, as undivided, unzoned, and with a shaded strip labeled community use. There was no dock on it. No parcel division, just a big blob labeled shared lake access. "That's fake," I said flatly. "It's not necessarily fake," she replied carefully, "but it's not official. It's not recorded in the county record books. And more importantly, it conflicts with a dozen other documents we already have." Where'd they get it? HOA submitted it to the county with their complaint. They claimed it was from a planning archive. I didn't like the way she said claimed. That afternoon, I drove to the county clerk's archive myself. I'd done research online, but I wanted to see the physical file. The archive was quiet. Fluorescent lights, old-school drawers with microfiche, and one clerk named Sandra, who looked like she could smell HOA drama a mile away. I asked for all shoreline documentation from the Cedar Hollow region, 1985 to 2000. After some flipping and cross-referencing, she pulled out a weathered survey from 1987, then a map dated 1994, same year as the community version the HOA submitted. But this one had clear property boundaries. My parcel was there. Doc noted, owner James T. Colebrook, my uncle. No shared access strip, no community label. Do you get a lot of duplicate maps? I asked Sandra. She looked up from the scanner. Sometimes, but not like this. That version they sent. Someone probably printed it off an old plan and edited it. Happens with HOAs more than you'd think. Edited. Yeah, they overlay old blueprints onto new map software. Problem is, those overlays don't hold up in court, and they know it. I thanked her and drove home with a full copy of the real 1994 survey in my passenger seat, along with 3 notarized support documents. Once home, I made digital scans, labeled and time-stamped everything, then created a mirrored backup on 2 separate hard drives. I wasn't just defending my dock anymore, I was preparing for war. That night, as the sun dipped behind the tree line, I stood at the edge of my property. The new steel chain gleaming in the fading light. I looked out at the dock, mine in every legal, historical, and moral sense. And I knew, without a shadow of doubt, they were coming for it. But I had 2 things Karen didn't: proof and patience. 2 days before the administrative hearing, I came home from the grocery store to find that someone had yanked my private property sign clean off the post and tossed it into the bushes. The steel chain was still intact, thankfully, but the motion sensor had been disabled. Wire cut, clean, precise. Someone knew exactly what they were doing. I didn't bother calling the sheriff. At this point, it would have just added to the ever-growing stack of incident reports. And frankly, they were already starting to treat me like the guy who cried HOA. So instead, I patched the wiring myself, replaced the sign, and added a second sign below it in all caps red. Tampering with security equipment is a felony. Hopefully that would make them think twice, though I was starting to believe these people didn't think at all. The next morning, Holly called with a tone that suggested I should be sitting down. They're submitting a second document, she said, a GPS-based geospatial analysis by a private survey firm. It supposedly shows the dock encroaching 5 feet into public shoreline space. Public shoreline space, I repeated, almost choking on my coffee. Where the hell is that even defined? It's not, she replied, because it doesn't exist. The lake is managed under state recreational use law, but the shoreline belongs to you, clearly outlined in your deed. Still, it's going to be used as ammunition. They're claiming your chain obstructs community egress. Community egress, I said. What is this, a goddamn fire drill? They're throwing everything at the wall, hoping something sticks, she said. We need to respond with force. I'm requesting a hearing adjournment so we can subpoena the metadata from their survey report. If it's fake, we'll know. I agreed, and she filed the motion the same day. That night, the real kicker landed. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Just one sentence. Don't forget what happened to the last guy who tried to fence off the lake. I stared at it for a minute. Then I poured a glass of bourbon, walked out to the dock, and sat under the canopy with the security lights casting a soft halo around me. It was calm. Still. The water didn't know about surveys or hearings or HOA presidents on power trips. It just was. The next morning, Holly sent over her newest discovery, a statement from a man named Richard Lee, 72, longtime Cedar Hollow resident and former HOA board member. He'd stepped down 5 years earlier for health reasons, but had apparently grown sick enough of Karen's antics to speak up. In his written testimony, he admitted that the HOA had held an informal vote in early spring to reclaim the shoreline by pressuring the new owner into cooperation. He used that exact phrase, pressuring, not requesting, not negotiating. Pressuring. Even better, he included a copy of an email thread from the HOA board where Karen had said, and I quote, "With enough heat, he'll cave. If not, we'll give the county a version of the map they'll believe." Holly called it a gift from the HOA gods. We were gearing up for the hearing now. The date had been moved back 1 week to accommodate our subpoena of the geospatial firm's report files. In the meantime, Holly helped me draft a full evidentiary packet, deed history permits, GPS logs from my own licensed surveyor, and video stills of Jason McCarty lighting the trash fire. We labeled it Exhibit Set AF, which made it sound almost clinical even though I wanted to slap Karen's greatest hits across the cover. But we weren't done. 2 nights before the rescheduled hearing, my security cam picked up another intruder. It was just past midnight when the phone buzzed. I checked the app and saw a shadow moving along the tree line. Not rushing, not sneaking, just pacing. I triggered the floodlight. The figure froze, then turned and walked away. Not ran, not stumbled, just casually left like it was a damn stroll through the park. The whole thing lasted maybe 20 seconds. Still, I saved the footage and handed it off to the sheriff's office in the morning. That's the 3rd incident in under a month, the deputy said while reviewing the file. You thinking about a private security service? I wasn't, but the question lingered. Later that day, I got another email from Holly. It included the preliminary results of the subpoenaed GPS report. Her note read, "Overlay map appears to be synthetic. Metadata shows it was compiled using third-party software with unverified coordinate inputs." Essentially, they photoshopped your dock into the lake like it was a cartoon. She attached a side-by-side image, my original survey map, next to the HOA's version. Their dock rendering wasn't just wrong. It was laughably off-center with shadows that didn't even match the shoreline's curvature. "This is what they're bringing to a government hearing," I texted her. Her reply came fast. "Yes, and it's going to blow up in their face." I smiled for the first time in weeks. Not a smirk, not a sarcastic twitch of the lips, a real, genuine, slow-burn smile. Because the storm was building, and for once, it wasn't above me. It was behind me, pushing me forward. I closed my laptop, stepped out onto the dock, and just stood there, breathing. No more phone, no more notes, just the sound of the water lapping gently against the wood I'd rebuilt with my own 2 hands. For a moment, the war quieted. The lake reminded me why I was fighting, and I was ready. The morning of the hearing was cold for mid-August, like the weather knew something big was about to break and decided to mark the occasion with a chill. I dressed sharp, button-down shirt, clean slacks, leather shoes, and brought 3 folders, one with every legal document my uncle ever collected, one with the video and image evidence from the security cameras, and one with copies of Holly's exhibits. Labeled neatly with lettered tabs and a cover page titled, "In Defense of Private Ownership, Colebrook v. HOA Cedar Hollow." I met Holly at the county administration building. She looked like a prosecutor stepping into closing arguments. Sleek blazer, glasses on, hair tied back like she meant business. She handed me a copy of the updated witness list. At the bottom, Richard Lee, former HOA board member, now our star whistleblower. "Ready to detonate?" she asked. "As I'll ever be," I replied. We stepped into the hearing room, a sterile space with beige walls and the faint smell of printer toner and institutional coffee. The 3-person administrative panel sat at the head of the room like judges at a science fair. Karen was already there, dressed in some lavender suit that probably screamed trustworthy authority in her mind. She was flanked by 2 other HOA board members, Mark Reynolds and Dina Thomason, and a lawyer I didn't recognize. His tie looked more expensive than my truck. The hearing began with procedural niceties, introductions, purpose of the session, rules of conduct. Then came the HOA's argument. Karen's lawyer stood and delivered a polished speech about decades-long community access, historical shoreline use, and the deep emotional investment of local families. He presented the 1994 recreational overlay map as the clearest evidence of communal understanding, followed by the fabricated GPS report showing my dock allegedly encroaching onto shared shoreline. They even played a short video clip from the local news piece, the same one where I'd been branded a reclusive gatekeeper, with swelling music and soft-focus images of children splashing near what wasn't even my property. I sat there, arms crossed, as Holly leaned over and whispered, "Let them hang themselves." Then it was our turn. Holly stood slowly and began methodically tearing the case apart like she was slicing through cake. She started with the deed history, paper trail back to the forestry trust, purchased by my uncle, official parcel registration with GPS coordinates to 4 decimal points, Then came the shoreline license, pier construction permit, and inspection approvals from 2 different county engineers. Then she dropped the bomb. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, "the opposition has submitted what they claim is an official map from 1994. What they have, in fact, is an unrecorded, unofficial mock-up. My client has the official version from the county archive. With notarized verification, please compare." She walked over and placed the 2 maps on the presentation table, side by side. Even from the seats, the differences were obvious. Ours had the parcel lines. Theirs didn't. Ours had a signed seal from the county engineer. Theirs had shadows that didn't match the tree lines. Then came the metadata analysis. The geospatial evidence from the HOA turned out to be a .p file compiled from open-source mapping software and overlaid using private coordinates that couldn't be independently verified. Holly quoted the tech forensics report. "In no way can this image be considered an official survey or legally binding representation." You could feel the temperature drop in Karen's corner of the room. She sat very still, lips pursed so tight they could have sliced paper. And then we called Richard Lee. He shuffled up to the stand like someone carrying decades of weight, then delivered a calmly damning testimony, how the HOA board had informally discussed creating documentation to build their argument, how Karen had personally said she would fix the map problem, and how he had stepped down partly because he was tired of seeing lines crossed. And just when I thought it couldn't get better, Holly played the audio. Someone, we never said who, had recorded part of an internal HOA Zoom call. Karen's voice rang out clearly. "If we present it as historical usage, the county will buy it. They always side with neighborhoods over individuals, especially reclusive ones like him." That audio hung in the room like smoke. The panel recessed for deliberation. It took less than 20 minutes. When they returned, the lead chair, a woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense tone, read the ruling aloud. "The complaint by Cedar Hollow Homeowners Association is without merit. The dock is located entirely within the boundaries of private parcel 4-827-36-1918, owned by Nicholas T. Colebrook. Any further interference with this property by members of the HOA will be considered unlawful." There was a pause. "And," she added, "in light of the submission of falsified documents, we are referring this matter to the district attorney for potential criminal investigation." Karen's face went rigid, like a porcelain mask developing hairline fractures. We stood. Holly shook my hand. The panel exited. Karen didn't move. As we packed our things, I looked over at her. "You could have just asked for an invitation," I said. She didn't respond. Just stared forward, hands clenched around her purse like it was the last thing keeping her tethered to reality. Outside the building, the sky had cleared. Sunlight, fresh air. Holly pulled out her phone and said, "Want me to draft a letter to the sheriff about Jason McCarty's latest midnight stroll?" "Let's do it," I said. "And while you're at it, send a copy of that audio to the local paper. I think the community deserves the full story." 3 days after the hearing, the sheriff's office came knocking. Not at my door, at Karen Murphy's. Word got out fast. I didn't need to be there to hear what happened, but one of the deputies I knew from a prior report later confirmed it. They showed up with a warrant in hand and walked out with her desktop computer, 2 file boxes labeled HOA correspondence, and her smug composure in complete collapse. The charges dropped the following week: submission of falsified government documents, attempted fraud through misrepresentation of land ownership, and conspiracy to unlawfully interfere with private property. Oh, and for dessert, evidence tampering, thanks to the doctored map files that included metadata tags with her damn name embedded in the document history. If she'd been any sloppier, she could have signed the forgery with a glitter pen and a winking emoji. The district attorney's office issued a statement that same afternoon. They were pursuing a formal indictment. Meanwhile, Cedar Hollow HOA scrambled to contain the fallout. I heard they held an emergency board meeting, closed to the public, where Karen was unanimously voted out as president and placed on indefinite suspension from all community duties. Her key fob to the HOA clubhouse was deactivated within the hour. The local news, bless their late-to-the-party journalistic instincts, came back with a new segment. HOA scandal exposed. Private dock dispute turns criminal. This time, the tone had changed. No more Misty Lake shots or childlike innocence. Just Karen's mug in slow zoom as the anchor detailed the charges, followed by a brief interview with Holly standing in front of a stack of binders like a legal terminator. I watched the broadcast with a cold beer in hand and a half smile. The next call came from the HOA's new interim president, Jenna Ford. We'd never spoken before, but her voice was calm, measured, and, unlike Karen's, laced with something approaching actual remorse. "Mr. Colebrook," she began, "on behalf of the Cedar Hollow HOA, I want to extend a formal apology. We've voted to issue a settlement for the legal damages you've sustained. Our insurer will cover litigation expenses, and we've allocated funds for additional compensation." "How much?" I asked, not because I cared first and foremost about the number, but because I needed to know if they'd finally figured out I wasn't someone to intimidate. "$185,000, she said, plus an official letter of non-involvement. The HOA will legally acknowledge that your property has never and will never fall under HOA jurisdiction." I didn't say anything at first. I let the silence linger, just enough to remind her that this call wasn't some favor, that I didn't owe them civility just because they finally woke up from their delusion. "I accept," I finally said, "on one condition, which is, Karen never sets foot within 50 feet of my property again. Put it in writing. Call it whatever you want. A protective clause, a trespass order, a formal banishment. I don't care. Just make sure she understands that if she even breathes near my fence line again, she'll be met with litigation so fast her neck will snap." Pause. Then, "Understood." I hung up and walked out to the dock. The sun was setting. The lake shimmered like polished glass. For the first time in months, the air didn't feel heavy. Over the next few days, I added a few upgrades. I had a powder-coated steel fence installed at the tree line. Low, discreet, but enough to signal that this was no man's land. A new coated gate at the dock entrance. Motion-triggered lights with higher sensitivity. And, because my sense of humor hadn't died completely, I added one final touch. A handmade aluminum sign mounted on the gate, engraved in bold serif letters, "Private Dock." Not for HOA use. Not for Karen. Entry Isari's prosecution. Tourists loved it. Locals snickered. Even the mail carrier asked to take a picture. As the weeks passed, the story faded from headlines and drifted into local legend. The Dock Wars, some called it. Karen's Folly. I just called it Tuesday. Jason McCarty got probation and mandatory community service. Ironic, considering he'd already been serving his community by torching it from within. Karen's trial was scheduled for the fall. Her lawyer filed a plea bargain, but word was the DA wasn't interested. Apparently, they'd been looking for a high-profile HOA abuse case to make an example of. And so, I lived my life, quietly, purposefully. Every evening, I'd step onto the dock, my dock, and sit beneath the canopy with a drink in hand, watching the water ripple under the sky. No one else. No shouting kids, no sun hat dictators, no clipboard-carrying TV crews. Just me and the ghosts of a peaceful lake slowly returning. That fall, Holly sent me a card. On the inside, in her signature sarcastic scrawl, she'd written, "Next time, just build your dock in international waters." Fall came slowly to Little Pine Lake. The leaves changed one by one, as if nature was reluctant to let go of the heat and chaos of summer. I didn't blame it. Things had gone too quiet. Suspiciously quiet if you asked my neighbor Clint, who had taken to waving from across the road like we were soldiers back from war. He even dropped off a bottle of bourbon with a sticky note, "For the Dock King, long may he reign." I wasn't much for titles, but I liked the sentiment. Karen Murphy's trial didn't exactly make national news, but around here, it was treated like the damn OJ case. The courtroom was filled with HOA board members, angry residents who'd signed that number Free the Lake petition and were now desperately pretending they'd never heard of it, and even a few reporters from local outlets hoping for juicy quotes. They got them. Karen pled guilty to 2 charges, submission of falsified documents and attempted fraud. The third charge, conspiracy, stuck after the DA presented her emails, including the now famous line, "If we present it as historical usage, the county will buy it." The judge, a no-nonsense woman who looked like she'd been dealing with suburban nonsense for 40 years too long, didn't even blink when she handed down the sentence, 14 months in county detention. No parole, probation after, including a no-contact order with me and a prohibition on holding any HOA office for 10 years. That last part nearly made me laugh out loud. The news article the next day called it an unprecedented accountability moment for HOA leadership. My mailbox was filled with letters, some apologizing, some congratulating, some offering baked goods. I accepted the brownies, declined the attempts at friendship. Then, one foggy October morning, I walked out to the dock, coffee in hand, and saw something different. A bouquet, fresh, sitting in a glass jar right at the edge of the dock. There was a small note tied to it with twine. To Mr. Colebrook, you reminded us that property rights matter, but dignity matters more. Thank you for standing up when others sat down. A former HOA member and swimmer. I kept the note, tossed the flowers. Look, I'm sentimental, not poetic, and added a new camera angle pointed straight at the dock entrance, just in case the former part was negotiable. A week later, I was approached by a county planner named Luis Ortega. Nice guy, early 50s, clearly someone who'd seen enough HOA disputes to know they rarely ended clean. He asked if I'd consider joining a volunteer advisory committee on shoreline property disputes to help write clear guidelines for private versus communal lake access. I thought about it for all of 10 seconds. No offense, I said, but I just got out of a war, not looking to enlist again. He laughed and said he understood. Then, before he walked away, he turned back and added, "But seriously, what you did set precedent. You're the reason we're rewriting those policies." I didn't say anything, just nodded. That winter, things stayed peaceful. The lake froze just enough to look beautiful, never enough to skate. I hosted my brother's kids for a long weekend and taught them how to skip rocks off the icy edge. They didn't care about HOA drama. They just liked the way the light hit the water. The following spring, I added a new solar panel to the dock's canopy, upgraded the lights to motion-detecting LEDs, and replaced the steel chain with a discreet aluminum gate, keypad included. But the sign stayed. Private dock, not for show use. Not for Karen, entry, SARS prosecution. It rusted a bit in the corners, got a few bird droppings now and then, but every time I looked at it, I smiled. Not because I was proud of the fight, but because I was proud I'd finished it. Sometimes winning doesn't look like fireworks or parades. Sometimes it looks like quiet water, solid wood under your boots, and not a single damn sun hat in sight.